Natasha,
Debbie,
show.
the show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way.
Hi, welcome to the Natasha and Debbie show.
What? Y'all know what I'm
You
doing.
are flying,
Yes, just trying to.
taking off.
Hey, if you guys could fly over to that like button. It's tacky every
Land
time.
on it, hit it,
Hit it.
and also consider subscribing. It's absolutely free.
So I fought for this video. I didn't fight anybody for this video. I just really, really wanted to do this video. I really wanted to learn more about the Harrier. So that's what we're going to do today. That's what we're going to do today. Because I think this is one of the coolest jets ever. And
Definitely.
come on. Y'all knew what I was doing there. It's just cool. And, you know, I want to learn more about this. So what's the title of today's episode? I hope you guys are excited about this one because I think this is going to be really, really interesting. And I just find this to be a really fascinating aircraft.
Everything we learn on this channel is fascinating. The title of this video is How Britain Changed Fighter Jets Forever. Harrier Jump Jet.
It's a cool jet, man. It's a cool jet. But I don't know anything about it other than, you know.
Exactly.
Which is awesome. And, you know, it was the first of its kind, right? So, and inspired ours that do the same. But I think it's so cool. And I want to learn the information on it, the history of it. And so guess what we're going to do? What I just said right now with you guys. Ace of Spades. Okay, I don't like that
May
view.
1969, and one of the greatest races in the world is taking place. Multiple aircraft are streaming from London's Post Office Tower to New York's Empire State Building to celebrate 50 years of the first transatlantic crossing. But one aircraft is winning, and it's all because it has one special ability: to fly straight up.
Which is so
Taking
cool.
off from central London up into the sky and then landing on a platform in the East River next to Manhattan, it doesn't require an airport or a runway. Winning the race in only 6 hours and 11 minutes, cementing it in the eyes of the world as the ultimate aircraft and the envy of the Soviet Union. This would become the only successful VTOL aircraft ever built by the West until the F-35.
Yeah.
This is the famous Harrier Jump Jet.
I'm excited right now. Like, that is just awesome.
Yes.
Seeing that thing take off
Yes.
and land, it's just so cool. I'm nerding out over this. And I'm not afraid to say it. I knew nothing about this other than that.
Yep.
This is before women were allowed at the pub.
The story of the Harrier
Right.
begins with a drink at the pub. Two
Does it
engineers
always?
Of
from
course.
separate companies sat discussing their work. Stanley Hooker of the Bristol Engine Company told his friend Sidney Cam of Hawker Aircraft that he had developed a new hybrid engine called the Pegasus from two other jet engines that could direct and vector the thrust, not just backwards. This would have twin cold jets on either side of the compressor and a hot stream that could be directed downwards, allowing lift vertically.
That's awesome.
Sidney perked up, almost spilling his beer, and said that this was the game changer that his company had been looking for.
Well, yeah.
So Sidney and Hawker found themselves looking for a new project to sink their teeth into. And hey, they thought, if we just take this engine design and put it in a jet, it
Or
might
a car.
crack the Da Vinci Code of the
Right.
time, a vertical takeoff and landing military jet aircraft. Flashback a few years before, many aircraft manufacturers around the world were looking for a new way to make an aircraft that had the vertical takeoff abilities of a helicopter, but also the speed of a jet fighter.
Now, I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised by that. So it makes sense that they were. And I don't know if he's going to tell us which countries. If he doesn't, and you know, let us know. But not surprised.
What doesn't surprise me is that it all started in a pub.
Exactly.
Something that would have been essential in the Korean War. This miracle plane wouldn't be restricted to vulnerable airfields, and it could fly anywhere, from carriers to forests and even the local Tesco car park. The issue was, how could you make a powerful, yet light enough engine that could do the job for this aircraft?
That's what I wanted to
And
know,
that's where the
actually.
new Pegasus engine came in. The
Bristol.
side note, of course, is that this concept was actually initially developed by a Frenchman called Michelle Weibo, but the two
Oh.
English boys didn't want to highlight that fact. So naturally, these two engineers were
Oh.
Yeah.
So that's a new fact that I did not know. Did you know that? Okay.
excited by the idea of picking up a meal deal in their own concept of a militarized flying car, and promptly
their
partnered
concept of
up
it.
to bring it a reality, and thus the Hawker Siddeley P1127 was born.
That looks so cool. Would love to
Hawker
have been there in that
Siddeley,
time.
newly merged, decided that this new aircraft engine combo would be perfect for a new NATO specification for a new light and tactical support fighter. This would
Okay.
replace the aging Fiat G91. Because this wasn't a
Don't know that
British
one.
military project, there would actually be no taxpayer dollars involved, so Hawker Siddeley would have to develop it on their own dime. One of the key challenges was that hoverjets was a total new science. They would need to develop physical models that replicated the Pegasus engine directing air downwards to understand what would happen to the concrete underneath, how it would bounce the aircraft up, and where exactly
good
the
points.
hot air would go. Plus, there was also no airflow over the prospective jet's wings, rudders, or tail. So how would you control it? The engineers developed small thrusters on the wingtips as a reaction control mechanism.
Oh, really?
But it had to be as simple as possible, with Sidney Cam, the same engineer from the pub, reiterating throughout the development that this had to be the most simple aircraft ever, saying that sophistication meant complication, and then escalation, cancellation, and ruination of the company. And
He's
that would
right,
be
that's-
his motto through.
That is freaking genius.
Yes.
In all
Keep it simple.
businesses, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sophistication meant complication, then escalation, cancellation, and ruination of the company. Really
Yes.
smart man. Like, that is one of the smartest sentences, quotes, you want to call it, I guess, quote, I've ever
Uh-huh.
heard when it comes to business in general.
Exactly.
Wow. I'm going to keep that one. That's worth the price of admission, which is free, by the way. So is that like button you haven't touched yet, guys. Hey, I'll be here all week. That was bad. I fire myself for that, sorry.
throughout the program.
That's
By
really smart.
1958, Bristol had completed a Pegasus engine design that could actually generate 13,000 pounds of thrust, which
That's
was
so cool.
slightly more than itself and the aircraft combined,
Oh.
meaning that the concept would actually work and this plane would take to the skies under normal conditions. This development was such a game changer that NATO, who had been keeping tabs on this little pet project,
course they would.
asked that if it could be built faster, and even told their member nations to pause ordering any other light tactical aircraft as this new flying VTOL jet was on
That's
the
so
way
neat.
and would fit their requirements. By this time, in classic late government fashion, which you'll see will come back time and time again in this story, the United Kingdom jumped on board the bandwagon and ordered 2 additional prototypes for their own testing purposes. But
Okay.
interestingly, there was some resistance because this was designed to be a subsonic light fighter for ground targets, and not a supersonic bomber interceptor, one that would go up against the Russian bombers that was the threat of the time.
Oh, okay. Makes
On
sense.
the 15th of July 1960, the first prototype was complete and was ready to fly.
I had no idea that this technology went back this far.
I know.
I did not know. I had no
know.
clue. I'm not, look, I mean, neither of us are big into aviation or any
No.
sort of transportation devices. What's
Devices.
that? Transportation device.
Modes of transportation.
Y'all know what I meant. So, blonde moments. But 1960?
Right?
I had no idea.
To
Did
have
you know
it-
that?
No, I had no clue. I can't remember dates when stuff happened.
I
That's
just think
very
it's
hard.
so neat. I had no idea.
Straight up.
It's a cool looking jet.
The
too,
two
let's just
boys
be
met
honest.
back at the pub and chatted about their testing
Back at the pub.
program. It had been a long road of testing various engine components, getting the hover controls right, and even solving the power problems. The original prototypes could only tether hover for 2.5 minutes at a time.
Oh, really?
Taking a long drink from his beer, Hooker turned to Sydney and asked, I suppose you're going to do some conventional flying for your first test flight tomorrow. And Cam replied, what for? Hooker said, well, just to make sure that the aeroplane is a nice aeroplane and everything is under control. With Sydney Cam replying dryly, oh, Hawker aeroplanes are always beautiful. Nothing wrong with a Hawker aeroplane. I'm not going to bother that. It will go vertical on its first time. The very
Okay.
next day, on the
Did it.
13th of February, before Valentine's Day, the prototype XP-831 performed its first flight for
Sure did.
22 minutes, hovering straight up. Once the engine was upgraded yet again, the aircraft was shown to be able to transition between vertical and horizontal flight, proving that it was a miracle and that the Holy Grail had been achieved. But what?
Could you imagine being the pilot
No.
testing that?
Nope.
Going,
No, thank you.
wow, this is supposed to work, and I'm not sure if it's going to. But it's cool to be the first one doing it, but still, oh no.
They had faith.
It's a miracle and that the Holy Grail had been achieved. But what wasn't achieved, though, was the
What?
NATO contract. You see, despite all the best efforts to make the very best plane, NATO was underwhelmed by its performance characteristics and decided to pass on the program.
Oh,
Their
interesting.
specific
Really?
requirements included the expectation for the performance of such an aircraft to be the equivalent of the conventional McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II fighter. These specifications called for a supersonic version of a VTOL strike fighter with a combat radius of 460 kilometers and a cruise speed of Mach 0.92.
Whatever.
Although they love the vertical takeoff and landing feature, flirting even with doing a joint order of 100 aircraft for their member nations, this never eventuated. The
I did not
hope
know
was
that.
that despite a lack of any militaries actually ordering this aircraft, Hawker Siddeley would be able to show that they had technically created the first VTOL fighter, and this would get some interest. Alas, the program
Would think
would
it
only
would.
limp on, with the Ministry of Supply ordering a few more prototypes to test and refine the technology, with the Royal Air Force shrugging their shoulders and saying that they had no use for this aircraft.
Really?
It looked like that by Christmas in 1961,
I
the
didn't know.
Harrier program had died before it begun.
Well, obviously didn't, so
True.
what happened here? This is fascinating.
But
Sorry.
on a
I'm
new
enjoying this.
winter's day in 1962, just after the new year, the Ministry of Aviation of England decided that they wanted to test the aircraft and ordered 9 of them to be built, called the Kestrel. The idea was to see if it would work as a great platform to be used on the West German border. The Kestrel was assessed by a multinational tripartite evaluation squadron, which consisted of British, US, and German pilots, to determine how a VTOL aircraft could be operated, with these evaluations finishing in 1965. And while this testing was ongoing, Hawker had returned to the drawing board to work on a supersonic version of the P-1127, which was now called the P-1154. It would solve the issues that plagued the
P1128.
NATO selection process and win them back that contract. And to ensure that
understand that.
everyone loved it, they also made sure it fit the requirements of a Royal Air Force aircraft and a Royal Navy aircraft, who were both looking for new fighters as well.
Okay.
Alas, NATO would actually scrap the project completely, despite the prototype being halfway built. And while they were trying to
Okay.
make an aircraft for both the Navy and the Air Force, this meant that it was a jack of all trades and a master of none. The RAF wanted a low-level supersonic strike aircraft, whilst the Navy sought a twin-engine air defense fighter for their Navy battleships. And with nobody involved in the project anymore, the British government withdrew in 1965. Man, it really looks like Hawker Siddeley can't get a break on
No,
this
he
new
can't.
technology.
No, they
You
can't.
would think that the Holy Grail would sell itself.
I
But
thought
there
so.
were still those
Yeah.
9 subsonic fighters that had been quite impressive and had wowed those US pilots and German pilots. The Royal Air Force had also noticed. What if they could bring the learnings from the P-1154 to the Kestrel program and build the perfect VTOL fighter? And they did just that.
Aha.
On the 31st of August 1966, the first of these P-1127
So
aircraft made their first maiden flight. And the RAF was so impressed they made a production order of 60 aircraft, giving the aircraft its final designation, the Harrier GR1.
Nice.
During its operations, it was found that running it along a short runway and then going vertical allowed it to carry much more weapons, 2
Okay.
under each wing and 1 underneath the fuselage. There was also ability to carry 2 30mm cannon guns that could be fitted to the underside. And that's why a lot of the British ships were given ski jumps, because it allowed these Navy versions,
didn't
which I'll
know
get to in a
that.
minute, I am going ahead slightly here, to take off with more weapons. This aircraft was so popular with the RAF that the US Marines would take notice, and they decided to put in their own order. And thus
Good.
the Harrier went from a miracle single aircraft that nobody wanted to a complete family that had international acclaim.
Nice.
About time.
The first of the variants created was the AVAA Harrier, which was used by the US Marines. And changes include the removal of all magnesium components, which corroded quickly at sea, and the integration of American radios and identification friend or foe systems. They also use a few other American components, such as American injection seats. And because this was a brand new aircraft that the Americans had never seen before, they also needed a twin-seater training version. So Hawker Siddeley created a longer version to accommodate this. Because of the costs involved with moving manufacturing over to the US, the Marines concluded that it would be better to just make the damn planes in England. Which, in terms of US military aircraft history, this is one of the only times that an aircraft has been built on foreign soil to be used extensively in the US military.
That's interesting.
That's fascinating stuff right there. And that's why you come to the Natasha and Debbie show. That's why I show up for this. That's the whole reason I'm in this room right now. Otherwise, I'd be taking a nap or passed out in a ham sandwich. I don't know.
Sure you will.
That was for patrons. You guys get that reference? It's from December. Yeah. That is cool.
That is very neat.
That is so neat. I would never. Wow. This is the most fascinating thing.
And that makes sense with the little ramp thing on the ships.
The what?
The ramp thing on the ships. Ramp.
Me doing this, you doing this. There's all kinds of things happening.
All kinds of things moving around here.
That was a fascinating piece of information.
Has been built on foreign soil to be used extensively in the US military.
Is it what year that was?
The use of these Harrier Jump Jets in the US Marines actually caused quite a stir, because this was a jet that didn't actually require the super carrier to operate from, which was all the range of the US Navy at the time. This led to ideas of small patrol craft called sea control ships that would have 4 Harriers on board that could provide close air support without the massive logistics of carriers. But my favorite design from the Harrier debate was also the creation of giant submarine carriers, which we already have a very long video about that you can watch after this.
I don't know that.
The RAF Harriers were also mostly deployed to Western German bases as a stonewall of a Soviet invasion. From camouflage rough bases, the Harrier was expected to be able to launch attacks on advancing armor columns from East Germany when the Soviets were to finally attack. But they actually saw real action in the 1980s in the Falkland War, performing everything from anti-artillery strike missions to Navy defense. Well, actually, it was the latter performed by a special naval version. The Royal Navy, seeing how happy the Marines and the RAF were with the Harrier, asked for their own version. They called it the Sea Harrier. It was designed for various naval roles, and it featured a radar, sidewinder missiles for fleet air defense, and navigational aids for carrier landings, corrosion.
I didn't know they were the same jet. I thought the Sea Harrier was something totally different.
I honestly did too. But now
Thank
we know.
you for.
But now we know.
Thank you for admitting that. I appreciate that, because I felt pretty stupid over here with myself.
You're not the only one.
We are so far apart right now, you know? Like, I felt so alone in that moment.
You're not alone.
And I appreciate that.
I'm right here with you.
I appreciate that. Okay.
Resistance modifications for maritime operations, and a raised bubble canopy for improved visibility. These later upgrades also equipped the Sea Harrier with AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles and the advanced Blue Vixen radar for long-range air-to-air combat, as well as the Sea Eagle missiles for anti-ship missions. So it made this little Harrier quite the unit when out at sea. After the Falklands War, British Aerospace developed the Skyhook concept, a novel method for operating Harriers from small ships. This system would use a crane to suspend the aircraft mid-air for launch and recovery, with additional cranes designed to hold weapons for rapid rearming.
Well, that's interesting.
The Skyhook aimed to conserve fuel and enable operations in rougher seas, where the Harrier had some trouble landing on sea decks. Although it was marketed to foreign buyers and even speculated to be used on large submarines, like those aircraft carrier submarines I mentioned before, the concept failed to attract any interest.
I can see why.
And from here, we saw an explosion of other crazy Harrier concepts, from a tandem cockpit design that looks very much like a cloud car from Star Wars, to a version that could carry a crack squad of 5 British commandos to prevent a terrorist attack on a North Sea oil platform. They would all sit here in the tail. And one of the most absolutely horrifying concept is the GRIER pods, the Ground Resupply Insertion Extraction Rescue Pod. The passengers would be slung in pods where the missiles would go and be carried around by the Harrier. Imagine the heat and the noise and sitting in that coffin. Yikes.
No.
In fact, this is such a wild idea that I'm going to cover it on my sister channel, They Won't Tell You, where we'll be talking about men in pods. By now, the Harrier had seen
Yeah, that
over a
sounds scary.
decade of service,
that.
and it was time to think about the future. And they came up with an original concept called the Harrier 2. And boy, you thought that the development of the original Harrier was full of drama. You haven't seen anything yet.
Uh-oh.
I'm like all excited.
One of the flaws of the original line of Harrier jump jets was its lack of range and payload. The American version, for example, carried less than half of that of the A4 Skyhawk and took twice as long to maintain to get it back into the air.
Okay.
So in 1973, a joint project was started by the two nations that bought the Harrier, USA and the UK, to develop a successor. While
Cool.
a more powerful engine was on the agenda, the Pegasus 15 by this point, it was actually too big to fit into the current Harrier fuselage. So this new plane would have to be bigger with a larger wing. They would call it the AV-16 because it was double the capacity and range of the American Harrier, the AV-8. However, the British were the first to pull out due to a lack of funding. And because they were only ordering around 60 aircraft, it didn't make sense for them to front up half of the cost. And you will see in a moment that this would be a decision that would really come back to bite them. The United States didn't want to be caught holding the bag and decided to pull out as well. However, the American partner, McDonnell Douglas, knew that there was merit to this redesign of the Harrier and kept working on it. They created a hybrid aircraft, modifying two original AVA-8s with a new wing, revised intakes, redesigned exhaust nozzles, and it resulted in a better payload and range aircraft. And despite having the same engine as the AV-8, the AV-8B was approved with an order of 324 aircraft. Because of this comically large production run, the British came back with their tail between their legs. They were enticed by the lower cost of acquiring Harriers promised by a large production run and the fact that the US was shouldering the expense of development. But because they were returning to the
Why is that
program,
all weird?
and despite being the originator of the design, McDonnell Douglas would actually be the main contractor, and the aircraft would be mostly built in Missouri, with only 40% done in England.
Well, that took a turn.
That did take a turn.
We went there, and then it came back here.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Didn't see that happening.
Now that must have stung. During this production run, the US developed a night attack version, a new trainer version of the B variant, and thanks to Italy and Spain joining the program, they also created an AV-8B Plus version with better radar and increased missile capability.
Joint effort.
Overall, 824 Harriers were built of all types and saw service around the world, and it was time to talk about the third version. In the early 1990s, McDonnell Douglas and British Aerospace, who had inherited the program, started to discuss about a new version called the Harrier 3. It was designed to maximize the capabilities of existing models by incorporating elements from both the Sea Harrier and the AV-8B. The aircraft was planned to feature an enlarged wing and a torsion box to accommodate additional fuel and hardpoints, which would also improve endurance.
You know what I thought that said really quickly? My brain was just not working right. Because, you know.
Box?
What's that?
I have no idea.
What'd you say?
Torso box?
No. Well, sort of. Contortion box.
Contortion.
Because of what they said about the guys in the pods earlier. I thought it's a contortion box for a second. I'm like, oh, they went ahead and did that after all.
We're just going to contort you and stick
Well,
you
I
down
mean,
here
you
underneath
kind
the
of need to
plane
be contorted to be in that thing, don't you?
We'll just pop you out when we need to drop you off.
Due to its increased size, folded wing tips were proposed.
That looks cool.
To support this heavier airframe, Rolls-Royce was expected to develop a more powerful Pegasus engine with 4,000 pounds of additional thrust. Because again,
well, you know, when he just said that about the Rolls-Royce, right? Like, I ignorantly did not know Rolls-Royce made jet engines. Until we did that video just, what was it, like a month ago or so on the Concorde. That was the first time I heard that. I did not know that. I had no idea. Also, we have a P.O. box if anyone wants to buy us a Rolls-Royce. Thank you.
Actually inherited the original Pegasus design. The Harrier 3 would also have been equipped with advanced weaponry, including brand new AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, making it a formidable air-to-air fighter. However, by this point, the design was nearly 30 years old, and this aircraft was just a product of its time. It wasn't really great at fighting enemies that were over the horizon of the Earth.
Still looks cool though, man.
Just using radar to fight each other. And it was also not great when it came to supersonic threats. So ultimately, when Boeing and BAE Systems continued studying this design in the early 2000s, they abandoned it in favor of the new F-35 clean sheet program.
I knew
The
that
British
was
would
coming 'cause I
eventually
already
sell
knew
off
that
their
part.
aircraft to the US Marines to be used for spare parts, lasting until last May in 2004 when the F-35 finally took over the mantle in the Marines of their VTOL jet fighter. Today, the Harrier is still in operation in Spain, with plans to
Really?
extend their operation beyond 2025 due to a lack of funds to buy the other aircraft. And this does seem like a rather unceremonious end to the legendary
does.
Harrier family, but in my mind, I think their legend speaks for itself.
I absolutely loved that. I loved that in every way possible.
Mhm.
It was so fascinating to hear the origin story, right?
Yeah, it
Well,
is.
like you said, of course it started in a pub.
Starting in a conversation in a pub.
Two guys in a pub, and the way it was, just fought over, and not even doing the test run. Test run? No, that's not a run. Test flight. That's what I meant to say.
And the
Brain
guy's
cells are all working.
confidence that it's going to work.
And it did, and that was
It
awesome.
just sure did.
I mean, I had no idea that, this was just fascinating. I really, really, really enjoyed this. And I just think it's a cool looking jet. It
is
just
very cool.
is. And, what we have now is awesome. But it comes from that, right? So
Exactly.
we pay
We wouldn't
homage
have
to
that without having the Harrier
Right.
first.
Absolutely. But I think it's one of the coolest jets there is, just because of the vertical takeoff and landing.
Mhm.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, consider subscribing to the show, and give us some more information if you have any. Hey, if you've ever served, first of all, thank you for your service.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And if you've ever flown one of these,
Yes, let us know.
yes, I really would love to know what the experience is like.
Mhm.
Because I can't imagine just. I don't know. That'd be
Yeah.
weird. I
It
wonder
would
what
be
it feels
awesome.
like. Yeah, I just think it's really cool. But I really enjoyed this episode, and let us know if you did too, because I think there's so many more nuggets in this and little pieces of history that
Mhm.
I want to know if you guys learned something today. So let us know. And thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next episode, guys. And until then, and as always, please love like jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Bye.
Bye.